Jumping along here. Ah yes, yet another wraparound to the climate debate again. Young disabled climate activist superhero girl Greta Thunberg, who loves to chastise as an adult, but not be treated like one because she's a child, said back in 2019 there are no known current solutions for the great climate crisis. In summary, over the years it became apparently obvious what she was pushing, or rather what she was told to push, and really getting at without stating directly, and to the surprise of no one, she finally came out and just said it. I wonder who the hell is really behind this poor girl being used as an ideological weapon and shield in the war against whom they consider to be their enemies. Let's just say this isn't a new tactic. Jumping along, the whole crazy thing about COVID escaping a lab, or maybe not. Here's a good response to those who say that that's an evil, racist conspiracy theory. Quote, hypothetically, if that were true, it would be one of at least a dozen times it's already happened. And then you link this, and then this, and this, and then this. If this is occurring online, those whom you are responding to or conversing with naturally will deny it, and that's fine. There are others reading who are not responding, and you're talking to them, not an online ideologue who completely lacks the capacity to understand they're wrong about something. Another fun fact about COVID. You know how magically the George Floyd protests didn't lead to any rise in COVID infections, but things like Sturgis were super spreader events? This is because the science behind this, i.e. contact tracing, and those who did the contact tracing themselves were told not to ask about the protests when doing their jobs. As such, the protests therefore had nothing to do with any rise in COVID cases because they were not allowed to even ask about it. Okie dokie, here's a fun one. There's the argument going around about how the Nazis learned about eugenics and all their evil shit from America, therefore seemingly justifying the argument that America is fascist. Indeed, there's merit to this, but unsurprisingly and true to form, something is being left out. First off, the term was actually first developed by a guy named Francis Galton, who was Charles Darwin's brother. Next, a guy came along named Alfred Plowitz, something, and coined the term racial hygiene, and developed a medical journal called the Archive for Social and Racial Biology. Then America stepped in with the creation of the American Breeders Association in 1906, and eventually Indiana became the first state to create a sterilization law in the nation. California, not to be outdone, ended up adopting its own laws, and at one point accounted for 80% of state-forced sterilizations in the country, that started off as racial, but ended up, unsurprisingly, become a money-saving issue, as it was poor non-whites who were dragging down social services. Then steps in Sweden, where their first Eugenics Institute was created in 1920 and led to a campaign of compulsory sterilization of people who were deemed to be undesirable. And they were deemed to be undesirable for a, wait for it, forward-looking, progressive, enlightened welfare state. Once again, it was to save the state money for state-provided services, and it was created by the social democratic faction of the government at the time. To send it all home, something quite similar is happening in Canada right now, with their very lax euthanasia laws. The speculation could be warranted that there's definitely a push on part of Canadian medical professionals to incentivize this, as such in the case of one guy here named Alan Nichols, according to nurses' notes, had a history of seizures, frailty, and a failure to thrive. She also wrote that Nichols had hearing and vision loss. This article is about how the family thinks he was pressured into assisted suicide, if not outright murdered. Here's another article about a guy who claims hospital staff are pressuring him into ending his own life because of his medical bills, which I thought was not a huge thing in Canada as they had superior medical care, right? So yeah, speaking of not true communism, everyone talks about going back in time and killing Hitler to end fascism. Indeed, our education system sucks, as stating that killing Hitler would end fascism is like saying cutting the fourth branch off the trunk of a tree would indeed kill the whole tree. We know of Mussolini, but his full history isn't really well known, if not outright obfuscated. He started off very much as a socialist, a renowned one no less, who was indeed part of the pro-Bolshevik extremist faction of the Italian Socialist Party that purged moderates or reformers. Sounds familiar, don't it? Mussolini was also renowned for having been able to quote directly from socialist literature, especially the Communist Manifesto. He eventually teamed up with a guy named Giovanni Gentile, whose core political philosophy was the rejection of individualism over the collectivist state. Really sounds familiar, don't it? Here are some fun Mussolini quotes which you'd think, out of context, came from an Antifa member today. Eventually, fascism metastasized into Nazism, and the rest is very well-known history we're all taught as early as possible and reminded of as often as possible. So, lefties, you want to kill fascism? Okay. Sorry, but you're going to have to admit the true root of it all. This is also why I kind of laugh at Nazis. They have no idea their ideology is based off of socialism as well. In the words of Churchill, they are indeed as opposites, much like the North and the South Pole. He also said some other pretty profound things about this topic, which I will briefly present here. On a final note, Karl Marx himself said some shit in his time too. Alright, so this video has gone on long enough, and I'm just going to begin the rapid fire link method right now, and we'll quickly try and end it so that you're not sitting here for too much longer. Thank you for watching this entire time, and I know you've had to pause quite a bit to read what I've been putting up. Sorry about that, but I'm just trying to get through this. Okay, so when people start taking puberty blockers when they're children, they most likely won't be able to orgasm at all later in life. The scientific proof that trans people say transsexualism exists naturally started with them pointing to people having 3 chromosomes, XXY and XYY, and this is their scientific basis. Sweden and other Nordic countries too have disallowed trans youth surgeries due to lack of real evidence that it's not a bad idea. Stacey Abrams, in response to Roe v. Wade being overturned, stated that the sound of a heartbeat at 6 weeks is a manufactured sound. She's suggesting there is indeed a conspiracy among the medical community in general to convince women that their babies are actually alive. Planned Parenthood immediately changed their website to accommodate her conspiracy theory. Speaking of conspiracy theories, if someone ever says the government wouldn't do that, just link them this. As per Operation Mockingbird, remember this?
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets politically aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think, and this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Conan O'Brien figured this out too a few years earlier in his Newscasters Agree segments. Lastly, here are 4 statements you're going to see and hear a lot in news headlines and political speech. They're used as linguistic triggers to incite suggestibility. Alrighty, back to the chemtrails thing. When someone says the government wouldn't do that, here's a story to show them about how the US Navy sprayed bacteria into the San Francisco fog under the justification it was an experiment. People got sick because of it. There was an entire slave trade built from North Africa where Arabs raided European villages and kidnapped whites. Back in 2020, California put out an affirmative action law that would have made racial discrimination in hiring practices legal again. It would have overturned civil rights laws. Yes, in order to enact affirmative action laws, civil rights laws must be overturned, because affirmative action laws are racist. Less people are having sex, men especially. On an unrelated note, women operate off of what is called hypergamy, where they will find a man who makes less than them unattractive, and more women are out-earning men. This means more and more people are going to be childless and single as time goes on. On an unrelated note, the Communist Manifesto talks about abolishing the family unit. On an unrelated note, a lot of women's suffragettes became communists. The video I made about Hermisman versus Sayer, the federal law that allows female statutory rapists to sue their underage male victims for child support, I found a few more cases and I added them in the description and the sources here. 70% of divorces are initiated by women. Very few men receive child support, and even fewer get alimony. Women don't go to jail for missing their child support payments, but men do and often lose everything in the process. Divorce is a huge factor in suicide for men, and more men are killing themselves than women. Here's a post on Reddit I made that went over quite well, the account is now deleted, about false rape accusations. Here's a story of a few false rape accusations from USC where, although found innocent, the men were still punished anyways. And lastly, here's that time that Elon Musk was asked to end world hunger instead of buying Twitter. He said if the UN could break down how the money would be spent to end world hunger, he'd fund it. They came back with a breakdown of that amount of money helping feed 42 million people for 1 year. And that's it. I'm tired, guys. It's taken me about a week to make this video, and in the process I've become more depressed and more anxious and more angry, and this is what I was trying to avoid. So, you know, I made this video for others like me, just for information on hand, because I know you can't help it if you're like me, but at the same time, as a warning and some advice to just at least back off for a little bit. And good luck. The war goes on, and it always will go on, and what I'm trying to avoid right now is becoming kind of like Rust Cole from True Detective.
Why should I live in history, huh? Doc, I don't want to know anything anymore. This is a world where nothing is solved.
So let's not be like that. If you have any other information you think is pertinent that others should know about, link them in the comments. If you think I'm wrong about anything, or if I am wrong about anything, link it in the comments. If you've got your own videos, your own channel, link it in the comments. And take it easy. Live life. And if there is a next time, as always, tune out then.